Hi guys. So just a little preface to this video. I have spoken in the past about feeling the need to diversify my content a little because fashion dolls are very much my primary hobby, but I do have other interests and other things I would love to talk about. I also just live in constant fear of there possibly being like a finite amount of doll related topics to talk about, that one day I'll just completely run out of video ideas, which is probably unfounded, but I don't think it could hurt to throw something else in there from time to time. Or it might hurt. This video might severely flop. I don't know, but I want to try. But I do want to be clear that I'm always going to cover things that are at least tangentially related to things I already talk about, or things that I'm pretty confident that my audience will be interested in. I promise I'm not going to rebrand into a Fortnite highlights channel or anything like that. If that ever happens, you all have my permission to just leave. But for those of you that might be checking out my channel for the first time, I apologize because I know that meant absolutely nothing to you. But all the same, hello, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about magical girls, or more specifically, live action magical girls, because there's something I personally find very interesting and fascinating. But first, we have to ask something important, right? What is a magical girl? What makes these girls so magical? Well, believe it or not, that is actually the subject of some pretty intense debate. But broadly speaking, magical girl is a genre, usually identified as a subgenre of fantasy or action that revolves around young girls with the ability to use magic. That is like the most far-reaching definition, but a lot of people believe that the standards are a lot stricter. For example, some would say that to qualify as a magical girl, the girls must be able to transform into an alter ego. So, say, Sabrina the Teenage Witch would not technically qualify as a magical girl because she has no set alter ego that she transforms into. But Sailor Moon, Madoka Magica, Pretty Cure, they all do. They're very much magical girls. But there are also people who say that transformations, although very heavily associated with the genre, are not strictly necessary to qualify for entry into the genre. And we can go back and forth about this, probably, for hours. That could be a video topic in of itself. But actually, I find that a lot of magical girl properties will self-identify themselves as magical girls, and that's usually just what I go off, personally. And everything I talk about today will, I think, be a pretty traditional idea of a magical girl. So, female cast, magic powers, transformation, and kind of a superhero aspect. Also very important to mention, the magical girl genre did originate in Japan. The vast majority of magical girl franchises are anime and manga, but there are also plenty of magical girls from outside of Japan too. Winx Club, Witch, Lollyrock, just to name a few. However, all the ones I'm going over in this video are from Japan, which adds another layer because that means they overlap with another genre. In Japan, tokusatsu is a genre that literally translates to special photography, and is a shortened version of tokushu satsuegi jutsu, or special effects technology. Tokusatsu refers to live-action movies or televisions that make heavy use of special and practical effects, and has an extremely rich history of its own. Today, tokusatsu is most often associated with franchises like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. But most, if not all, of the shows I'm going to go over today also qualify as a tokusatsu, which I guess is not incredibly vital information, but the tokusatsu genre is sort of well known for being pretty male dominated in terms of characters, I mean, not necessarily demographic, but I just thought that context made the topic more interesting. Okay, that's probably enough of me rambling through an intro. Let's go ahead and get into it. Oh, and this is not an exhaustive list of every live action magical girl show, but more like an overview of some of my personal favorites. Unfortunately, because it's a niche within a niche, a lot of the shows are really, really difficult to find information about, much less actually watch. But okay, let's start with a big one. Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon from 2003. Sailor Moon is a manga that was authored by Naoko Takeuchi, which ran from 1991 to 1997, and was adapted into an anime series that ran from 1992 to 1997. The franchise would grow to become one of the most popular and influential Japanese properties of all time, and would go on to essentially define the magical girl genre as well. A lot of what people consider to be staples and requirements for magical girls, often they come very directly from Sailor Moon. The manga and the anime both ended in the late 90s, but Sailor Moon's popularity really did not wane at all. Toei, the studio behind the anime, was eager to continue capitalizing on the series, which led to the creation of a live-action adaptation a few years later, the aforementioned Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon, which, by the way, is also the full title of the manga and the anime, but the live-action series is really the only one people tend to refer to by its full government name. Also, Naoko Takeuchi has spoken in the past a little bit about how the idea of Sailor Moon was partially inspired by watching tokusatsu shows growing up. So Sailor Moon eventually becoming a tokusatsu is a pretty cool full circle moment. The live-action series also benefited from Naoko having a more involved role in its production. She couldn't work too much on the anime due to it releasing concurrently with the manga, but now she had a lot more say-so. Due to that, Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon follows the manga a little more closely than the anime did, but it also deviates in some pretty big ways as well, which we'll talk a little more about. The basic plot is, of course, the same as any other adaptation of Sailor Moon. Usagi Tsukino, a sweet, clumsy, airheaded girl, is gifted magical powers and the ability to transform into a superhero alter ego, the titular Sailor Moon. Accompanied by her mentor, the talking cat Luna, and 4 other Sailor Guardians, she fights against the forces of the Dark Kingdom who are attempting to take over the world. So trust me when I say that this is, hands down, one of my all-time favorite Sailor Moon properties. I love this show so much. I think I may have watched it like 3 times total by now, but it's been a few years since my last rewatch, but I truly have extremely fond memories of it. One thing that I think sets it apart from the manga and the anime is that it's formatted much more like a drama than it is an action show, which some people might think is to its detriment, but I disagree wholeheartedly. The show focuses a lot on the relationships and character development of the main cast, and you get a real sense of growth in their individual friendships. The chemistry in the cast and like the acting in general, honestly, is pretty phenomenal and really fun to watch, especially for a show that really doesn't take itself too seriously. And something I always found really interesting about the show is that it took Minako, Sailor Venus's character, in a wildly different direction than the manga or the anime did. She's a pretty different character, kind of a darker character, actually, I guess you could say. And that's not to say that the original Venus lacked any depth or development, but I just always found Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon's version to be particularly intriguing. It actually has some pretty cool character moments with Naru, too, who in the manga and the anime was really only around to be Sailor Moon's normal best friend who is kind of gradually phased out as the series goes on. But Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon gives her relationship with Usagi a lot more weight than I think it had in the original series. Often, live-action adaptations of animated shows try to do this thing where they want to improve on the original show. They go into it acting like the fact it was animated was something limiting about it and that it could only be better if it was live action instead. But that's absolutely not the case here. Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon knows what it is. It knows its audience, and it doesn't do anything to try and replace the anime or the manga necessarily, but rather to build on it and retell the story in an interesting way. A lot of the cast were notably pretty big fans of the original show, and you can tell everyone who worked on it had a strong love and appreciation for the source material. I think you can see this especially in the transformations and the attacks, which are choreographed basically just like they would be in animation. There's just as much sparkles and glitter and cheesy eye-melting effects as you would expect from a proper magical girl transformation. There's some other cool ways that it engages with its medium too, such as the decision to make Luna a talking, sentient plush cat as opposed to a real cat, which I always found amusing as someone who grew up with the English dub of the original anime, where Luna's voice was that of a middle-aged British woman.
My name is Luna, and I have been searching for you for a very long time.
So when I watched this as a kid, I just imagined that voice coming out of this adorable, marketable cat plushie. Also, a little bit of a spoiler, but Luna actually gets a Sailor Guardian form in this series, which is one of those notable deviations from the original manga. Also, I just have to say, because I majored in costume design, this is my thing, but I love the costumes in this show. You can tell they weren't working with a gigantic budget, but I just really appreciate that they didn't try to tone down the uniforms, like, at all. Also, oh my god, the costumes for the Dark Kingdom, especially Queen Beryl, like, that's Mother right there. I will say, though, the fight choreography, I guess it kind of depends on what you expect going into it. If you go in wanting to see martial arts on the level of, like, Kamen Rider or Super Sentai, you are going to be very, very disappointed. The actresses are all pretty young, and none of them are trained martial artists, and it does show. That said, the action choreography does do something pretty interesting, where it incorporates a lot of ballet and gymnastic moves into the fighting, which I think serves its purpose really well and gives the actresses something that is much more to their strength. Also, major respect to the actresses too, because they're doing all of this in heels, mind you. We are definitely living in an age of live-action adaptations of animated properties, and I think Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon stands out as a good example of what you should be doing. Is it extremely dated? Absolutely. Cheesy? Oh, no doubt. But it has everything that I loved about the original Sailor Moon, and it embraces the source material while utilizing live action in a lot of interesting ways. It's definitely an underappreciated adaptation of Sailor Moon, I think, and deserves way more attention than it gets. A lot of fans, especially newer ones, I don't think they even know that it exists, which is a shame. I think it should absolutely be experienced, if for nothing else, at least the novelty of it. The next one I want to talk about, Cutie Honey, a film from 2004. Cutie Honey is another one that is an adaptation of an existing work, which is Cutie Honey, obviously, a manga that was authored by Go Nagai in 1973. Like Sailor Moon, Cutie Honey is considered a pretty foundational magical girl series that laid the groundwork for how the genre is seen today. But unlike Sailor Moon, it also does tend to kind of fly under people's radars, even in the magical girl community. One reason for that is that traditionally magical girl properties are aimed at young girls. Cutie Honey, however, from its inception, was a series aimed more so at the male demographic. Cutie Honey has had a lot of adaptations over the years, one that even employed an animation director from Sailor Moon, but pretty consistently it's a series that is known for being rather gratuitous. The exception actually being the series I just mentioned, Cutie Honey Flash, which was aimed pretty specifically at Sailor Moon's demographic and toned down a lot of the violence and fan service from previous iterations. But every iteration of Cutie Honey has more or less the same premise. It follows an android girl named Honey Kisaragi, who is able to transform into a variety of different disguises. Motorcyclist, an idol, a ballerina, etc. But the grand finale is always the transformation into the pink-haired superhero Cutie Honey in order to fight against the villainous Panther Claw organization. And due to the franchise's nature, Cutie Honey's transformations often involve a fair amount of nudity, of sex appeal. And there's always some ploy to put Honey in a conveniently compromising position, which I hope this doesn't sound like I'm criticizing the franchise for being what it is, because I honestly don't mind too much, but I do think it's important to, know what you're getting into, right? Hi, editing me here. So, something I didn't mention, but something I probably should have, is that although I do like a lot of the later Cutie Honey iterations, this is one case where I don't really recommend checking out the original manga. Or, I don't know, your mileage might vary, but I think it's bad for a variety of reasons, actually. Now, if I had to describe the live-action version, it would be camp. Pure, unadulterated camp. In line with Cutie Honey's sensibilities, the lead role of Honey Kisaragi was given to Erika Sato, who at the time was known mainly for being a model in men's magazines. And there are no shortage of opportunities to ogle Eriko throughout the film, if that's your thing. But she is also, by all means, a fantastic actress. She was so thoroughly committed to this role, and she did an amazing job portraying this sort of character. Also, fun fact, but the film was directed by Hideaki Anno, who you might know as the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And a lot of what I said about Pretty Guardian's Sailor Moon, I think applies here as well. It's a movie that utilizes live action really well, and it's very self-aware too. I think to the point that a lot of the special effects are almost intentionally goofy, and we still get some pretty cool action moments from the film, but there's just something so uniquely charming about the way it conducts itself. Cutie Honey 2004 also utilizes a technique that was dubbed Honeymation during production, in which they sometimes used stills of the characters, then warped and stitched them together as if they were actually animation frames, and that makes for a few really interesting action sequences. And to that end, you can tell the movie was storyboarded and shot very intentionally as if it were an anime, down to the cinematography and the camera angles, which is not a super unique, never been done before thing for a movie to do, but it definitely gives Cutie Honey its own sort of identity. Also, a costume design moment incoming again, but I really have to commend Cutie Honey's costume. It's a lot more detailed than what she wore up to this point and slightly more practical, but it looks great. It doesn't lose any of Cutie Honey's charm in the transfer to live action, and in a lot of ways, I think is even sexier than the animated counterpart. Yeah, it looks amazing. And despite what I said earlier, the movie is not just a silly, nonsensical cheesecake fest. Is it ridiculous?
Yeah.
Yes. Is it laden with fan service? Yes, absolutely. But it's also a drama with a surprising amount of character and depth to it, particularly in regards to Honey's relationship with the police inspector, Natsuko Aki. The two go from rivals to really close friends to what I'm pretty sure is a very strongly implied romance. Or not so implied, because the animated version of the film, yes, there's an animated adaptation of the live action adaptation. It's called Cutie Honey. But that one does more or less confirm a blatant romance between Honey and Natsuki. But what I'm trying to say is that the film has action, it has character depth, it has romance, it has it all, really. And I find it especially interesting because, and I'm going to speak broadly here, but typically in these male-focused films with a female lead, the women don't tend to have a lot of personality. But Honey and Natsuki are both genuinely very strong, very interesting characters in their own right. The movie is definitely not for everyone. Cutie Honey in general is not for everyone. But I do think it's, again, just something worth experiencing. Because the franchise holds such an interesting place in magical girl history, and the movie, likewise, is in a very interesting spot for live-action magical girls specifically. It's also not the only live-action Cutie Honey project. There was a full live-action series, Cutie Honey the Live in 2007, and another movie, Cutie Honey Tears in 2016. I actually have not watched these, so I can't speak to how well they hold up to the movie, but I guess I should. I'll report back, I guess. Okay, so we've talked about live-action magical girls that are adaptations of existing works, but what about ones that are wholly original? Well, look no further than the Girls X Heroine series. Or maybe it's a Hunter x Hunter situation, and it's just pronounced Girls Heroine. I actually have no idea. As far as I can tell, they never said it out loud in the show. Anyways, Girls Heroine is a sort of joint collaboration between TV Tokyo and the toy company Takara Tomy, who might be familiar to you as the manufacturer of Rika-chan dolls. And Rika herself actually did get a few collaboration dolls with the show. The cast members also functioned as idols themselves while their seasons aired, and would put on songs and performances as promotion for the show. The first season aired in 2017, and the show altogether ran until 2022. There were 6 seasons in total, with each of them having their own self-contained story and cast. The first was Idol Warrior Miracle Tunes, which was themed after, you guessed it, idols and music. Season 2 was Magical Heroine Majimajo Piers, which had themes of dreams and magic. Secret Heroine Phantom Mirage, which took on a Phantom Thief motive. Police Heroine Love Patrina, which went the other way around and took on a police officer theme. Bitomo Heroine Kirameki Powers, which took on video game theming. And Rista Top of Artists, which changed the format to focus more on straightforward dancing, and was also the only season to feature male characters in the principal cast. Of all the ones I talked about, I do think Girls Heroine is the most low stakes, which is not a bad thing by any means, but I do think its target demographic skews a little lower than Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon's did. At least that's the impression I got. And obviously it skews much, much lower than Cutie Honey's did, significantly younger. That's to say, do not go into this show expecting elaborate fight choreography, or really any fight choreography at all, because there is really none to speak of. There is, however, plenty of dance choreography to go around. All the transformations and big attacks are essentially just these long dance sequences, and the girls very rarely fight against who you could consider like a traditional enemy. They mostly just fight against regular people who have been cursed to be in a particularly bad mood. Except the last season, where they kind of dropped the fight scene pretense altogether and they just become literal dance battles. And that's not a criticism. There are a lot of magical girl shows that feature very little in the way of action or fighting. But I think it is definitely the simplest watch of the three. Because, there's not a whole lot of real danger or suspense. It's just something very clearly made for young kids, which I personally tend to have no problem watching and enjoying, but just don't go into it expecting it to be anything else, The show itself is very cute. The first 5 seasons especially are very, very sweet, very sugary. All of the glitter and sparkles and cute, bubbly idol music really you could ever want. It is very much like the super traditional magical girl show, just in live action, which is just cool to see, right? Especially since special effects have come a long way since 2003, A fun fact about Girls Heroine is that the first season did actually get licensed to an Italian production company to remake the series to air in Italy in 2018. It was filmed in English, then dubbed in Italian and I think Spanish. I haven't actually watched this version, but it's cool that it exists. They did unfortunately only do the first season, though. I guess it just didn't pan out the way they hoped it would. The series is, right now, I think, officially on a hiatus, as opposed to being canceled. But it does look like the future of it is pretty uncertain. I'm not sure of what the exact reasoning is, because as far as I can tell, the first few seasons were very successful and pretty popular, but I guess interest in the series just kind of waned over the years. But yeah, if you want just a cute, fun, light-hearted, live-action magical girl show, check this one out for sure. This one is definitely your best bet in that regard. I don't think it necessarily does anything monumentally different or more impressive than a traditional animated magical girl show would do, but that doesn't mean it's not worth watching. If nothing else, just for the value, there's not really a live-action show quite like this one, especially as an original project and not an adaptation of something else. And there we have it. Again, this is by no means a comprehensive examination of all live-action magical girl shows that ever existed, but it is a pretty good starting point, and a good look at just the range and variety of them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you came out the other side with some recommendations to look forward to. Unless you've already watched all 3 of these, in which case, let's hang out, because I feel like we would be best friends. But if there's a specific live-action magical girl show or movie that you were hoping I'd mention and I didn't, let me know down in the comments. Let everyone know. Give us more recommendations. But let me know what you think of live-action magical girls. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you want to see more of them? Whatever's on your mind, let it out down there. And when you're done with that, just be sure to like and subscribe for any future fashion doll or fashion doll related content. Thank you.